5/779, the report of the Secretary General on the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. At this meeting, the Security Council will hear briefings by Mr. Lacroix, Ambassador Michael Imram Kanu, Permanent Representative of Sierra Leone to the United Nations and Chair of the Security Council Committee established pursuant to Resolution 1533, concerning the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Dr. Javid Abdelmonaim. I now give the floor to Jean-Pierre Lacroix.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council. I thank you for this opportunity to brief the Council on the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the activities of MONUSCO on the eve of your deliberations concerning the renewal of its mandate. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Her Excellency Thérèse Kayinkwamba Wagner, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as the presence of the representative of the Republic of Rwanda and Burundi, and I also welcome the participation of Sierra Leone in its capacity as chair of the Security Council Committee established pursuant to Resolution 1533, as well as that of Dr. Mohamed Javid Abdelmonaim, International President of Médecins Sans Frontières. Mr. President, as indicated in the latest report of the Secretary-General, the DRC continues to face a security and humanitarian crisis in which civilians in affected areas are the primary victims. In recent days, the new offensive, launched by the AFC M23 in South Kivu, has revived the spectre of a regional flare-up with incalculable consequences. Recent developments pose a serious risk of the gradual fragmentation of the DRC, particularly in its eastern part. The territorial expansion of the AFC M23, the establishment of parallel administrations, and the weakening of state presence in certain areas fuel a dynamic that directly threatens the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. At the same time, the conflict is becoming increasingly regionalized. The direct or indirect involvement of forces and armed groups from neighboring countries, as well as the cross-border movement of displaced populations and combatants, significantly increases the risk October agreement establishing a joint ceasefire mechanism and verification mechanism testified to strong regional and international mobilization in favor of political solutions enabling the establishment of lasting peace in Eastern DRC. I take this opportunity to commend the engagement of Qatar, the US, and the African Union mediator, His Excellency for Nasingbe, who made these advances possible, and I reaffirm the full support of the United Nations and particularly MONUSCO for the ongoing peace efforts. The recent developments in South Kivu undeniably illustrate the gap existing between diplomatic efforts and the reality experienced by civilians affected by persistent hostilities. In this context, the prompt implementation of Resolution 2773 of the Security Council, calling among other things for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, and for all parties to honour the commitments undertaken within the Washington and Doha processes, remains essential if diplomatic progress is finally to translate into tangible improvements in the situation on the ground. While recent diplomatic progress has generated genuine hope, persistent ceasefire violations and the resumption of hostilities pose a real risk of the collapse of ongoing diplomatic efforts. The growing gap between political commitments and their effective implementation on the ground undermines the credibility of peace processes, weakens trust among the parties, and fuels the sense of abandonment felt by civilians. Without concrete and immediate measures to ensure compliance with agreed commitments, conflict dynamics may close the door to dialogue.
South Kivu, which is no longer within MONUSCO's area of operation, the AFC M23 advances in Uvira territory and its reporting capturing of Uvira town on the 9th of December with the alleged support of the Rwandese Defense Forces, RDF, has triggered a major military escalation just days after the signing of the Washington Accords. Congolese forces, alongside Burundian forces and local Wazalendo militia, have reportedly engaged in large-scale hostilities involving the use of heavy artillery and air power. These clashes have resulted in military and civilian casualties, destruction of infrastructure, and significant population displacement, including into neighboring Burundi. In North Kivu, the AFC M23 has continued to pursue its strategy of territorial expansion and further consolidation of parallel administration in areas under its control, in clear violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Meanwhile, across North Kivu and Ituri, civilians continue to face grave threats from a range of armed groups, both foreign and Congolese. In Lubero territory in North Kivu, the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, killed at least 132 civilians during the month of November alone. In Ituri, Codeco, Zaire, and CRP fighters continue to operate near major displacement camps, where MONUSCO is alone in providing direct physical protection for more than 100,000 displaced persons. Mr. President, since SRSG Keita's last briefing to this Council, the United Nations Joint Human Rights Office has continued to document numerous grave violations and abuses, including conflict-related sexual violence committed by armed groups and state actors. Women and children are disproportionately affected, and cases of forced displacement, sexual violence, arbitrary killings, and abductions remain widespread. In areas under AFC/M23 controlled, restrictions on MONUSCO's access continue to impede its ability to fully monitor, investigate, and report on violations, as mandated by this Council.
Mr. President, in this context marked by intensifying threats, the prevention of violence against civilians constitutes a central pillar of MONUSCO's action. In North Kivu and in Ituri alike, the mission has strengthened its preventive approach based on deterrence presence, risk anticipation, and close engagement with communities. In Ituri, where armed groups operate in the immediate vicinity of displacement sites, MONUSCO maintains daily patrols and community alert mechanisms, which have helped prevent multiple attacks and protect particularly vulnerable areas. In North Kivu, the mission continues to establish early warning systems and reinforced mobile patrols, particularly in areas exposed to AFC M23 expansion and to targeted ADF attacks. MONUSCO also ensures constant dialogue with communities, especially women and youth, in order to ensure that the protection provided fully meets their needs and realities on the ground.
Mr. President, the humanitarian situation is equally alarming. Continued hostilities, repeated waves of displacement, the ongoing closure of Goma and Kavumu airports, and shrinking humanitarian access have compounded an already severe crisis. Around 5.35 million people are displaced within the country. Since January alone, 2.68 million people have been newly displaced, while 2.9 million have returned forcibly or voluntarily. More than 24 million people face acute food insecurity. At the same time, humanitarian agencies are facing crippling funding shortfalls. As of today, the humanitarian response plan for the DRC is only 22% funded. The consequences of these funding gaps are devastating. In this challenging environment, MONUSCO has remained undeterred in its determination to deliver on its mandated priority tasks amidst numerous constraints, both operational and financial. The implementation of the contingency measures aimed at managing the peacekeeping-wide liquidity crisis is now largely completed. The mission has taken every possible step to mitigate the impact of these measures on its ability to protect civilians in its area of operations and deliver on other mandated priority tasks. To this end, the mission has sought to enhance the mobility of its remaining units and increase joint patrols with the FARDC and the Congolese National Police in Ituri, while striving to maintain a robust presence around vulnerable IDP sites. MONUSCO's police component also continues to reinforce accountability and community policing, notably through strengthened cooperation with the General Inspectorate of the Congolese National Police. Nonetheless, the unavoidable reduction in uniform and civilian personnel required to keep the mission financially afloat will have an inevitable impact on its rapid response capacity and operational reach. In Ituri, the mission remains the primary source of physical protection for approximately 100,000 people living in IDP sites within the immediate vicinity of MONUSCO bases. Efforts to reintegrate ex-combatants through community-based initiatives continue as part of the broader effort to create a protective environment for civilians in the province. In Chomia, Jugu territory, MONUSCO, working with the Disarmament, Demobilization, Community Reintegration and Stabilization Process, PDDRCS, has launched a project that supports 257 people, including 89 ex-combatants, through vocational training and community work, strengthening food security and social cohesion. In the Grand Nord of North Kivu, MONUSCO peacekeepers regularly conduct joint patrols with the Congolese armed forces, deter armed groups' activity, and sustain a protective presence along key roads and access routes. In Goma, the AFC/M23 restrictions on the supply of fuel, water, and electricity continue to pose a significant challenge for MONUSCO and its personnel. While the recent release of several impounded diesel trucks is a welcome development, the mission remains reliant on generators and water trucks to sustain essential services. Freedom of movement restrictions continue to delay planned rotations, although its constant engagement with the mission's constant engagement with the AFC/M23 has enabled a complete rotation of the Uruguayan and Moroccan contingents. Efforts to reopen Goma Airport in support of humanitarian flights have not yet yielded results. While MONUSCO's leadership continues to engage with all relevant stakeholders to lift these restrictions, the active support of this council remains essential to enable the mission to regain its full freedom of action. Despite these constraints, MONUSCO personnel continue to carry out their duties with professionalism and resilience. The mission has enhanced situational awareness and reaction times and maintained a dynamic, proactive posture to deter threats against civilians and adapt to evolving risks. Since the beginning of the year, MONUSCO has facilitated the repatriation of more than 80 foreign ex-combatants affiliated with the FDLR and over 127 dependents in coordination with the Rwanda Demobilization and Reintegration Commission. Determined to leverage its capabilities and expertise in support of ongoing peace efforts, MONUSCO has also intensified efforts to support disarmament and repatriation in Masisi, Walikale, and Rutshuru in support of the FARDC's call for the voluntary surrender of the FDLR. DDR specialists will be co-located at the mission's bases in Kiwanja and Kinshasa in AFC/M23 controlled territory. The transit camp in Munigi on the outskirts of Goma remains operational, while a new transit site is being established in Sake. Mr. President, the days and weeks ahead will be decisive. Ongoing diplomatic efforts offer a clear pathway towards a lasting political settlement that will bring a long-awaited measure of relief to the millions of Congolese affected by successive cycles of conflict. These must be sustained and intensified to prevent further escalation and lay the foundation for lasting peace, stability, and prosperity in the DRC and the broader Great Lakes region. MONUSCO stands ready to leverage its expertise and capabilities in support of current peace efforts, which are fully consistent with its current mandated priority tasks. The mission is also gearing up to contribute to ceasefire monitoring and observation efforts, should the Council entrust it with this task. The mission has participated actively in the 3 meetings of the ceasefire observation and monitoring mechanism that have been convened since the signing of the 14th October agreement between the government of the DRC and the M23, which established the mechanism. Plans are already in place, which the mission will continue to refine as the contours of the ceasefire, the functioning of the observation and monitoring mechanism, and the full implication of its involvement become clearer. At this critical juncture, it is essential that the Security Council do its utmost to create the conditions necessary for MONUSCO to play its role in protecting civilians while meeting the growing expectation related to its role in supporting ongoing efforts, of course, should there be an implementation of the commitment made in Washington and Doha. It is also vital that Member States ensure that the mission is provided with the necessary resources to deliver on its core mandated responsibilities. As the Secretary General has underscored in his report, MONUSCO remains an essential component of the broader international effort to resolve the crisis in Eastern DRC and lay the foundation for lasting peace and stability in the Great Lakes region. Support to ongoing peace efforts, together with the protection of civilians, disarmament and demobilization, strengthening and security institutions, and human rights monitoring should form the core of the mission mandate. In renewing MONUSCO's mandate, I encourage the Council to redouble effort to create the conditions necessary for effective implementation, including full compliance by all parties with Resolution 2773 and the lifting of restrictions on the mission's freedom of movement.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, diplomatic progress must now translate into real improvements on the ground so that the Congolese people can finally glimpse the security and stability to which they aspire. At this critical moment, the role of the Security Council is more crucial than ever. A clear, united and resolute response from the Council is essential to prevent a worsening of the conflict, curb the risks of fragmentation of the DRC and contain the growing regionalization of violence. The Council has the necessary political and normative tools to ensure compliance with its resolutions, support ongoing mediation efforts, and send an unequivocal message to all parties regarding the imperative of respecting the ceasefire, international humanitarian law, and the sovereignty of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. MONUSCO, for its part, will continue to implement its mandate with professionalism and determination. With the support of this Council, it stands ready to contribute fully to ongoing peace efforts. I thank you.
Sir Michael Imran Kanu.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, colleagues, I have the honor to deliver a statement in my capacity as Chair of the Security Council Committee established pursuant to Resolution 1533 concerning the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It is my intention to provide an overview of the work of the committee since my last briefing on 27 June 2025. Mr. President, since the last briefing, the committee held 3 informal consultations in 2025. During the meeting held on 2nd July 2025, the coordinator of the group of experts provided an overview of the main findings and recommendations contained in the group's final report, following which committee members discussed the findings and recommendations contained therein. During the meeting held on 20th October 2025, the coordinator of the group of experts provided an overview of the program of work of the group of experts, considering Resolution 2783. During the meeting held on 27th October 2025, the committee received a briefing by the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs on behalf of the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, pursuant to paragraph 5 of the Resolution 2664. Mr. President, in accordance with paragraph 115 of the note by the President of the Security Council, dated 13th December 2024, the committee issued 2 press releases containing a brief summary of the informal consultations held respectively on 2nd July and 20th October. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ambassador Imran Kanu for his briefing. I now give the floor to Dr. Mohamed Javid Abdelmonem.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the invitation to brief this Council on the humanitarian situation in the Eastern DRC. Excellencies, good morning. Mr. President, allow me to begin with a truth this Council must acknowledge. Despite the appearance of political momentum in recent months, and despite the signing of peace agreements, MSF teams continue to witness staggering levels of violence, displacement, and deprivation in the Kivus and Ituri. Our patients describe fleeing bombed villages and extreme brutality. From MSF's vantage point in hospitals, clinics, and displacement sites, the picture is unambiguous. This crisis is not easing. Health systems are collapsing, sexual violence is widespread, and humanitarian access and funding are shrinking as needs rise. The gap between political signaling and lived reality of millions is widening. In fact, the ink has barely dried on the agreement signed in Washington, and M23 has already launched a sweeping offensive in Uvira, driving an estimated 200,000 people from their homes, 40,000 of them into Burundi. Stark evidence that the promise of peace is masking a landscape of persistent large-scale violence. It is increasingly clear that ongoing peace efforts are serving to consolidate the extractive interests of powerful actors rather than to bring the people of DRC relief. None of this is new. The violence communities face is rooted in decades of resource predation and structural neglect. This is the enduring tragedy Generation after generation of Congolese have seen their lives and dignity sacrificed at the altar of politics and profit. Until civilians are no longer treated as expendable, no political process will bring real relief. Mr. President, despite high-level commitments in Washington and Doha, violence against civilians remains routine. Both state forces and non-state armed groups, including M23, FDLR, ADF, elements of the FARDC and their Wazalendo allies, continue to endanger civilians and obstruct access to care. All have been implicated in grave violations of international humanitarian law, summary killings, sexual violence, looting, and blocking humanitarian assistance. The toll is devastating. In Binza, MSF patients described men cut down in the fields and women and children shot along the riverbank, their bodies left to drift downstream, testimonies which echo wider reports of massacres in North Kivu. Several of our patients said these attacks were carried out by members of M23. In Rutshuru Hospital, trauma admissions rose by 67% in July. More than 80% of gunshot victims admitted to MSF-supported facilities in July and August were civilians. In Ituri, over the course of this year, we have carried out more than 1,500 trauma surgeries in one single hospital, most for wounds related to conflict. Medical facilities and staff are not spared. Ambulances have been stopped at gunpoint, and armed actors have stormed medical facilities, threatening and terrorizing both patients and staff. In Masisi, just 2 weeks ago, the Kazinga Health Center, clearly marked with MSF insignia, was looted and destroyed by a Wazalendo militia. 3 MSF colleagues have been killed this year. These violations underscore a profound failure to protect civilians. Mr. President, sexual violence in Eastern DRC is a long-standing emergency which has scarred communities for decades. Today, it continues at an unimaginable scale. In the first 6 months of this year alone, nearly 28,000 survivors sought care in MSF-supported facilities in Eastern DRC. That's an average of 155 survivors each and every day for 6 months. 3 out of 4 attacks are committed by armed individuals. Attacks occur in fields, on roads, at water points, and inside homes. Many survivors reach care too late for preventative treatment. Many never reach it at all. At the same time, essential medical supplies are running dangerously low. In North and South Kivu, half of all health zones lack post-exposure prophylaxis, leaving survivors without the critical care that could prevent infection, avert unwanted pregnancy, and reduce long-term harm. The scale and normalization of sexual violence reflect a profound collapse of community protection and a near total absence of accountability. Women and girls tell us that sexual violence is not simply feared, it is expected. Mr. President, the health system is collapsing under the combined weight of violence, chronic neglect, mass displacement, aid cuts, and emerging parallel administrations. In many areas, up to 85% of facilities face critical drug shortages, nearly 40% of health personnel have left their posts, and more than half of facilities we have evaluated have closed or been damaged. The consequences are lethal. In Walikale, deaths of severely malnourished children arriving within 24 and 48 hours of admission rose by 89% and 309% compared to last year. Families arrive far too late, delayed by insecurity, cost, and the absence of functioning care. Preventative health services have crumbled, and vaccination is repeatedly disrupted, leading to an upsurge in preventable infectious diseases. Cholera cases already exceed 38,000, and deaths have more than doubled compared to last year. Measles continues to spread. A malaria outbreak of unknown proportions is unfolding, while neither diagnostics nor essential treatments are available to contain it. Mr. President, as needs grow, the space to deliver humanitarian assistance is contracting. Across eastern DRC, state and non-state actors alike impose restrictions unrelated to civilian needs. Life-saving assistance is delayed, diverted, or blocked. The closure of the Goma and Bukavu airstrips and the failure of Kinshasa and M23 to reach an agreement to reopen them has reduced entry points for supplies and personnel into eastern DRC and slowed movements within the Kivus. Reaching Walikale can now take more than a month during the rainy season. Shifting conflict lines have also meant that delivering supplies from Bukavu to Uvira has required crossing 4 international borders at 4 times the previous cost. Humanitarian access is not optional. It's a legal obligation. Airports must be reopened, and passage along key routes must be secured, and medical and humanitarian supplies must move without impediment. On top of the collapse of civilian protection and the erosion of access, major donors are cutting support and eliminating life-saving services in full view of surging needs. Mr. President, commitments made in capitals mean little when they are not matched with concrete measures on the ground. We make 3 calls. First, civilian protection must be placed at the center of all political and diplomatic engagement. Progress cannot be measured by the number of agreements signed, but by whether people are safer in their homes, on the roads they travel, and in the places they seek care. Second, humanitarian access must be upheld, not as a gesture of goodwill or a confidence-building measure, but as a moral obligation underpinned by international humanitarian law. Third, the humanitarian response must be resourced at the level this crisis demands. Without flexible, timely funding, preventable deaths will continue to mount. In conclusion, Mr. President, from where we stand, beside patients, not behind podiums, these debates do not lack awareness, they lack consequence. This Council is regularly briefed on the situation in DRC. Members are able to describe violations civilians face with precision, even as those violations continue unchecked. For people living through this conflict, the question is not whether this Council understands their reality, it is why that understanding so rarely translates into meaningful protection. This disconnect is damning, and that failure is profound. If this Council cannot act when so many lives are at stake, then the promise of civilian protection becomes a hollow doctrine, recited here, but absent where it is most needed. What is required today is neither new rhetoric nor new diplomatic architecture. It is the will to insist that civilians are not expendable and that their rights to safety and dignity are non-negotiable. Not in DRC, not anywhere civilians are under threat. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Dr. Javid Abdelmonem for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to begin by thanking the Under-Secretary General, Monsieur Jean-Pierre Lacroix, as well as the President of Médecins Sans Frontières, Dr. Mohamed Javed Abdelmonem, for their very illustrative remarks. I also thank the Permanent Representative of Sierra Leone, Mr. Michael Kanu, for his briefing in his capacity as chair of the 1533 Sanctions Committee on the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Finally, I also welcome the presence of the Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the DRC, Her Excellency Madame Thérèse Kayikwamba-Wagner, as well as the representatives of Rwanda and Burundi. We meet today as the M23, supported by the Rwandan Defense Forces, has launched an offensive on Uvira this week, only a few days after the Washington Agreement was signed on the 4th of December. This situation should be of deep concern to the Council at a time when its members are deliberating on the renewal of MONUSCO's mandate. I will stress 3 messages. Firstly, the offensive by the M23, supported by the Rwandan Defense Forces, endangers regional stability and threatens the security of civilians. The capture of the city of Uvira in South Kivu, on the border with Burundi, carries serious and imminent risks of regional escalation and directly threatens the security of neighboring countries. the use of suicide drones constitutes a worrying escalation. These clashes have forcibly displaced tens of thousands of civilians, further worsening the situation in a region already facing the second most severe humanitarian crisis in the world. The international community mobilized to assist affected populations during the Paris conference on the 30th of October. France reiterates the urgent need to protect civilians. France calls on the M23 to put an end to its offensive and on the Rwandan Defense Forces to withdraw from Congolese territory in accordance with Resolution 2773, adopted unanimously by this Council. The M23 must honour its commitments under the Declaration of Principles and the Doha Framework Agreement. Secondly, in this context, France reaffirms its confidence in the mediators. The African Union, in particular, through the presences of Angola and Togo, the United States and Qatar, have undertaken immense efforts to achieve a lasting settlement of the conflict, which has devastated the peoples of the Great Lakes region for several decades. This is not the time to weaken the support expected from all members of this Council. We must collectively reaffirm the need for all parties to respect international humanitarian law and their obligations regarding the protection of civilians. Resolution 2773 must be fully implemented and respected by all actors, beginning with its call for an unconditional, effective, and verifiable ceasefire. Respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC is non-negotiable. Provocative actions or hate speech that endanger civilians must cease. The Washington agreements must be respected. The Doha Framework Agreement must be implemented. And we call for a continuation of the efforts of the African Union. Recent events risk undermining progress toward a lasting political resolution of the crisis. My third message: we must not allow this situation to jeopardize MONUSCO's mandate or the negotiations underway. As the Undersecretary General pointed out, MONUSCO continues to play an essential role when it comes to protecting civilians and with regard to a lasting solution to the conflict. France, as penholder, has presented a proposal intended to position MONUSCO in a role supporting all peace efforts. This includes the question of ceasefire monitoring, for which MONUSCO has clear advantages thanks to its presence on the ground, its expertise, its capabilities, and its impartiality. The restrictions imposed by the M23 on its freedom of movement and access to essential supplies are unacceptable and must end. We therefore call on the members of the Council to continue negotiations in good faith, bearing in mind the responsibility they hold in light of the current situation, and knowing that this delegation will be following this situation very closely. Mr. President, the people of Eastern DRC, the countries of the region and troop contributing countries expect the Council to rise to the occasion and meet its responsibilities given the urgency of the moment for peace in DRC and the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the A3+ members, namely Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, and my own country, Sierra Leone. We wish to thank Under-Secretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix and Mr. Javid Abdelnomen for their briefings on the situation on the ground. We welcome the participation of Her Excellency Mr. Kaykwamba Wagner, Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation, and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the representatives of Rwanda and Burundi to this meeting. Over the past 3 decades, MONUSCO and its predecessor mission, MONUC, have been present in the DRC, supporting efforts for peace, stabilization, and the protection of civilians, in a context marked by recurring armed conflict, complex humanitarian challenges, and a major political transition. The A3+ reiterates our deep appreciation to the mission for its continued service and dedication to the Congolese people under extraordinary challenges. Yet, as we meet today, peace and stability in the DRC remain volatile despite sustained regional and international diplomatic efforts. We would also like to express our profound appreciation to Ms. Bintou Keita, SISG in the DRC and head of MONUSCO, for her leadership and commitment to advancing peace and stability in the DRC. Our dedicated service to the Congolese people, particularly our efforts to safeguard and support civilians, have been invaluable. Mr. President, the recent development in Eastern DRC, most notably the fall of Uvira City, the last major settlement in South Kivu, to the M23 AFC rebels, is profoundly alarming. Even more alarming is the worsening humanitarian situation for the civilian population who have been displaced, fleeing across the borders in search of safety and potentially creating pressures for receiving countries. We underscore the importance of supporting these countries as they serve as safe havens for those fleeing the violence in the DRC. The A3+ remains gravely alarmed by the humanitarian situation in the DRC, which has long been among the worst, most severe. The renewed offensive in South Kivu risks overwhelming an already overstretched and critically underfunded humanitarian system. With over 5.7 million people internally displaced and an estimated 24.8 million facing food insecurity amid acute security and access constraints. Humanitarian personnel cannot sustain operations under continued hostilities in South Kivu. Reports from international humanitarian organizations on the ground are also alarming. According to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, nearly 200,000 people have been displaced, with women and children bearing the greatest burden of this renewed violence. It is thus absolutely necessary for this Council to act decisively to halt the escalation of the conflict in Eastern DRC. In view of this, we must remind all parties to the conflict of their obligations under international human rights law and international humanitarian law to protect civilians during conflict. Mr. President, the A3+ further reiterates that the solution to this conflict remains fundamentally political. We are therefore encouraged by last week's signing of the Washington Accords for Peace and Prosperity by Presidents Felix Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame, witnessed by African leaders, including President João Lourenço of Angola and Chairperson of the African Union, President Faure Gnassingbé, President of the Council of Ministers of Togo, and the African Union appointed mediator of the crisis between the DRC and Rwanda, and President His Excellency Mohamed Ali Yusuf, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. As underscored by the AU Chairperson, and I quote, "The Washington Accords represent an important moment to put an end to a conflict that has lasted for more than 3 decades, a conflict between brothers and neighboring countries who, for various reasons, have been fighting one another over the years with heavy consequences both for the population and the economies of their respective countries." End of quote. The A3+ fully echoes this sentiment and reaffirms its strong support for the leadership and mediation effort of African stakeholders. We therefore urge all parties to honor their recent commitment undertaken in Doha and Washington, D.C., and to work in good faith towards lasting peace, stability, and prosperity throughout the Great Lakes region. Mr. President, the renewed offensive in South Kivu comes at a time when the Council is discussing the future of the presence of the United Nations peacekeeping mission in the DRC. In light of the current realities on the ground, discussion on MONUSCO's future must be approached with the utmost care and with the interests of the people of the Great Lakes region at the center. The safety of their lives and livelihoods and enabling their prosperity must guide our decision on the renewal and the orientation of the new MONUSCO mandate. After decades of conflict, and I quote, business as usual, end of quote, approach is no longer tenable. A genuine paradigm shift is needed, one that reimagines the United Nations presence in ways that reinforce African-led proposals and that of the Doha and Washington processes. Harmonizing these proposals will require sincere engagement and understanding of African perspective, moving beyond symbolic acknowledgement towards meaningful inclusion of African solutions. Mr. President, to conclude, the A3 Plus is of the view that in renewing the mandate of MONUSCO, the mission must be provided with the necessary operational flexibility to support implementation of the mandate, not only in terms of protecting civilians, but where appropriate, deployment and targeted return to critical areas currently lacking a permanent presence of governmental authority. Additionally, the mandate should strengthen MONUSCO's role in supporting transitional justice and accountability for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The A3 Plus stands firmly in solidarity with the Congolese people and all affected communities in the region. With the resilience and unity of the Congolese people, supported by regional mechanisms and international effort, we believe that a sustained solution to this conflict is within reach. The A3 Plus will continue to offer its unwavering support towards the realization of these aspirations. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to our briefers today. Colleagues, President Trump was pleased to have convened DRC President Tshisekedi and Rwandan President Kagame in Washington on December 4th for the signing of the Washington Accords and the Regional Economic Integrated Framework. It was a true and sincere demonstration and effort towards peace. However, peace processes require parties to uphold their commitments to that very process. And the United States is profoundly concerned and incredibly disappointed with the renewed outbreak of violence in the eastern DRC. Today, I want to share with you some additional information on the scope and the sophistication of Rwanda's involvement in eastern DRC. Since its reemergence in 2021, Rwanda has had strategic control of its proxy armed group, M23, as well as M23's political wing, the Congo River Alliance, or AFC, and has deployed M23 and the AFC to achieve Rwanda's geopolitical goals in eastern DRC. Kagame has been intimately involved in planning and executing the war in eastern DRC, providing military and political direction to M23 forces and AFC for years now. The Rwandan Defense Forces have provided materiel, logistics, and training support to M23, as well as fighting alongside M23 in DRC with roughly 5,000 to 7,000 troops as of early December. This is not counting the possible increases from Rwanda in this most recent advancement. In more recent months, Rwanda has deployed multiple surface-to-air missiles and other heavy and sophisticated weaponry into North and South Kivu to aid M23 in its conflict against DRC. Rwanda and M23 began their offensive just this last weekend to take Uvira, with Rwandan forces co-located with M23 along the front lines. Additionally, we have credible reports of increased use of suicide drones, increased use of artillery by both M23 and Rwanda, including strikes into Burundi. So rather than a march towards peace, as we saw under President Trump's leadership in recent weeks, Rwanda is leading the region towards increased instability and war. And in light of the commitments made in the Washington Accords, we are deeply concerned that the Rwandan military's continued presence in Congolese territory in support of M23, and we will use the tools at our disposal to hold to account spoilers to peace. We call on Rwanda to uphold its commitments and to further recognize the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo's right to defend its territory and its sovereign right to invite Burundian forces onto its territory. We are engaging with all sides to urge restraint and to avoid further escalation, including refraining from hostile anti-Tutsi rhetoric. As this council negotiates the MONUSCO mandate, the United States will seek to ensure the mission has the capabilities to provide support to both the Doha and Washington agreements, keeping in mind that the parties themselves bear full responsibility for their successful implementation, and we look for the members of this council's support as we negotiate this mandate's renewal. MONUSCO's ability to provide critical enabling support to these processes, however, hinges entirely on its ability to move freely, to sustain itself, to implement its mandate without interference. And the fact that UN peacekeeping forces are under siege by forces backed by a member state that itself is a troop contributor to peacekeeping missions, frankly, is a sad hypocrisy. Unfortunately, M23's months-long blockade on MONUSCO has undermined its ability to operate effectively in and out of Goma, as many representatives have stated here today. And for its part, Rwanda continues to deploy surface-to-air missiles and additionally conduct spoofing and jamming operations, which have effectively grounded MONUSCO air operations. So how can MONUSCO succeed under these conditions? We demand the immediate end of such obstruction, which violates M23 and Rwanda's obligations under both the Doha and Washington agreements, respectively. We remain steadfast in our support of MONUSCO and its role in the realization of these historic agreements, which we believe hold great potential to end the decades of suffering in Eastern DRC. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
We're grateful to Undersecretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix for his briefing. We're grateful to the Permanent Representative of Sierra Leone for his report as the chairman of the 1533 Sanctions Committee on the DRC. We carefully listened to Dr. Mohamed Javid Abdel Moneim, and we welcome the participation in the meeting of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and the Diaspora of the DRC, Madam Teresa Wagner, as well as representatives of Rwanda and Burundi. Today's meeting, unfortunately, is taking place against a background of a serious escalation in South Kivu as a result of an offensive by the M23 group. We have often repeated that we are particularly concerned about developments in this province. It is located, the city of Uvira, which is located near the border of Burundi, has for several months faced a threat of encirclement and assault by the M23. This situation, just a few days after the summit in Washington, once again demonstrates that international diplomatic efforts do not produce tangible results and do not, in essence, have an impact on the situation on the ground. There can be no talk of an effective truce or a ceasefire. All of this simply remains an expression of intentions by the sides on paper. Today, the Great Lakes region has nearly reached a dangerous line. beyond which a large-scale military confrontation between states can take place. We appeal to the sides to halt their fire and to focus on real steps to resolve the crisis and to create normal conditions of life for the civilians of all countries of the region. Rwanda, as well as the DRC, must begin to implement Security Council Resolution 2773 and stop cooperating with the M23 and the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, FDLR. As long as these basic precepts are willfully ignored, the situation will only continue to deteriorate. I would like to underscore that we support all international efforts aimed at ending the armed conflict in the east of the DRC and the achievement of a long-awaited peace for the Congolese and their neighbors. There can be no doubt about that. However, the agreements signed in Washington and in Doha must be assessed based on how they're being implemented, and the current situation in South Kivu is indicative of the real attitude of the participants of the negotiating process to the agreements they signed on to. We note the efforts of the UN peacekeeping mission on the stabilization of the DRC. Many peacekeepers have sacrificed their lives in stabilizing the situation in the DRC. We also note the role of the head of MONUSCO, Bintou Keita. However, in current conditions, MONUSCO continues to remain a hostage to the escalation between the states of the region. MONUSCO has been in this situation for almost a year, since the January escalation of the armed conflict as a result of the actions by the M23. Over 40% of the personnel of the mission are in fact confined to UN facilities on the territory that is under the control of that group in North Kivu. Russia has often stressed that this kind of situation is unacceptable and cannot continue. However, some colleagues in the Council and their supporters in the Secretariat have all this time insisted to us and other members of the Council that on the need to wait just a little longer and for the results of international mediation to make it possible to revive MONUSCO. The mission could indeed play an important role in contributing to resolving the crisis, in particular in terms of monitoring the cessation of hostilities. However, bearing in mind the developments in South Kivu, it's quite obvious that conditions have not been met for this at this time. If you will, hurrying up to propose unconventional solutions should have been done earlier. Today, what we need is an extremely cautious approach. Any serious changes in the mandate of MONUSCO must take into account the real situation on the ground and be based on clear and detailed recommendations to the Secretariat. Only such an approach will make it possible to make the mission operational again. I'd like to stress that we're ready to work with colleagues in the Council to formulate instructions to the Secretariat to ask them to present to us possible options of involving MONUSCO in monitoring the ceasefire regime and overall adapting the mission to the current circumstances. However, we will not agree to poorly designed initiatives at odds with reality. Forcing them through on political grounds will ultimately only worsen the already complex situation of MONUSCO and will lead to yet another blow to the reputation of UN peacekeeping. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. My thanks to our briefers who have brought helpful clarity and insights to our discussions, and I welcome the participation in today's meeting of Her Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as the representatives of Rwanda and of Burundi. And I thank the chair of the 1533 committee for his update. President, I will make 3 points. First, the United Kingdom welcomes the signing last week of the Washington Accords and the signing of the Framework Agreement in Doha last month. We commend the leadership of the United States, Qatar, and of the African Union in driving these efforts. We call on the parties to implement the agreements and to honour their commitments in full. Second, we are deeply concerned that despite progress on the political tracks, violence has increased in South Kivu. We condemn the recent M23 offensive and takeover of Uvira with the support of the Rwandan Defence Forces. The UK urges an immediate cessation of hostilities and for all parties to fully comply with Security Resolution 2773. There can be no military solution to this conflict. This escalation in fighting has worsened an already dire humanitarian situation, which will only further deteriorate as refugees flee across the border into Burundi following M23's latest offensives. We are greatly concerned by continued reports of human rights violations and abuses, including conflict-related sexual violence, on which we have heard tragic testimony from Médecins Sans Frontières today, perpetrated by the parties to the conflict, and in particular by M23 and Wazalendo. The United Kingdom calls on the parties to fully comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law, including ensuring the protection of civilians. Third, the United Kingdom reiterates our full support for MONUSCO. The mission continues to play a vital role, especially in supporting the protection of civilians. We also express our support for a MONUSCO role in ceasefire monitoring to embed the progress towards peace and security made through the political process. It is critical that MONUSCO is able to deliver its mandate without hindrance. We again call for M23 to lift all obstructions to the mission's operations. We urge all parties to ensure MONUSCO's freedom of movement in compliance with the decisions of this Council. President, the UK calls on all parties to now seize the opportunity to deliver the peace, prosperity, and security that the people of Eastern DRC so deserve. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Allow me to begin by expressing our appreciation to Monsieur Jean-Pierre Lacroix, as well as to Dr. Mohamed Javed Abdelmonem, International President of Médecins Sans Frontières, for their valuable briefings. Your work on the ground, saving lives in the midst of so much violence is so important, and we express our condolences for your staff members that have lost their lives in their service. We also welcome the presence of the distinguished permanent representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, and we welcome the permanent representatives of Rwanda at this session. Panama highlights the recent diplomatic progress, including the peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda, which was reached in June 2025, facilitated by the United States, as well as the framework agreed in Doha between the government of the DRC and the M23, signed on the 15th of November 2025. However, the reality on the ground reminds us that the signing of agreements does not equate with peace. What we heard from USG Lacroix and from Médecins Sans Frontières makes it clear that while we're talking here, hundreds of thousands of lives are hanging by a thread. The current situation that MONUSCO is facing in Goma is a source of serious concern, particularly due to the restrictions affecting its operational capacity. In this context, it is essential to guarantee full freedom of movement for its personnel and to ensure the implementation of its mandate, as well as respect for international law, in order to preserve the safety of its staff and the continuity of its operations. Furthermore, Panama underscores the importance of the full implementation of Resolution 2773, which establishes essential parameters for the protection of civilians and the advancement of the transition, as well as of the sanctions regime renewed through Resolution 2783. This is a key tool to reduce the operational capacity of armed groups, combat illicit economies, and pressure all actors to comply with their obligations. Mr. President, our delegation particularly welcomes the formal approval of the Regional Economic Integration Framework signed by the Presidents of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Republic of Rwanda on the 4th of December in Washington, D.C. We believe that this progress represents a genuine opportunity to bring to an end more than a decade of conflict and suffering in the region if it is implemented on time and respected by all the parties. Renewed violence is only making it difficult to grasp this great opportunity for peace. Nevertheless, more than 7 million people remain internally displaced, and the most recent reports reveal that over 80% of health centers in North Kivu and South Kivu lack essential medicines and the necessary personnel to serve the entire population. And we continue to closely follow the recent fall of the city of Uvira, and we agree with the concerns already expressed by other members of this council in that regard. This situation, aggravated by advances of the M23, attacks on infrastructure and the severe humanitarian funding gap, place thousands of people at risk who require urgent treatment for diseases such as malaria, HIV, and tuberculosis, which disproportionately affect women, girls, and boys. Panama would make an urgent appeal to donors to close the funding gap of the 2025 Humanitarian Response Plan and to strengthen operational capacities on the ground. The protection of humanitarian staff must be given priority, and this aid must not be politicized, and it must arrive without restrictions to those that most need it. The presence of MONUSCO remains crucial for the protection of civilians and for supporting the Congolese government's efforts in the area of security, governance, and stabilization. This Council has reiterated that the withdrawal of the mission must be gradual, responsible, and conditions-based, not driven by rigid timelines. The drawdown of troops and flexible funding will produce effects that are contrary to what is desired. Mr. President, the Congolese people have paid an unacceptable price for decades due to regional instability, competition over resources, and the absence of strong institutions. Panama is convinced that there is no military solution to this crisis. Only a combination of national political will, genuine regional commitment that is sincere, and sustained support and unified support from this Council will make it possible to transform the potential of the Democratic Republic of the Congo into a reality of peace and development and prosperity for its population. Thank you very much.
Representative of Panama for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I thank Undersecretary Lacroix, Chair of the DRC Sanctions Committee, Ambassador Kanu, and Dr. Abdel Monaim for their briefings. I welcome the presence of DRC Foreign Minister Her Excellency Kai Kwamba, as well as the representatives of Rwanda and Burundi at today's meeting. The current situation in eastern DRC remains tense. Escalating conflict and violence have led to a grave humanitarian crisis. The international community must make concrete efforts to promote a de-escalation. I wish to emphasize 3 points. First, it is imperative to end hostilities immediately. M23 has launched a wave of offensives in recent days and captured key cities such as Uvira, leading to a sudden escalation of tensions on the ground. China expresses deep concern over these developments and strongly condemns the violence committed by M23. We urge the group to implement Security Council Resolution 2773 73 and relevant peace accords, immediately cease hostilities, withdraw from Uvira and other cities, and stop its expansion in order to prevent further spillover of the conflict. External actors should halt all forms of support for armed groups in eastern DRC and work towards a de-escalation. All parties to the conflict must abide by international humanitarian law, protect civilians, including foreign citizens, and lift all restrictions on critical infrastructure and humanitarian access. China firmly supports the DRC government's efforts to safeguard its sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity with a view to restoring national authority in eastern DRC as soon as possible. Second, sincere dialogue and negotiation are essential. There's no military solution to the conflict in eastern DRC. A political solution is the only way out. Although parties to the conflict have recently signed a spate of peace agreements, the situation on the ground has not truly improved. The priority now is for all parties to demonstrate political will and fulfill their commitments. The mediators, on their part, should also effectively fulfill their monitoring responsibilities. All parties should urge M23 to intensify its negotiation with the DRC, conclude the outstanding protocols of the Doha Framework for Comprehensive Peace Agreement, and ensure that the ceasefire monitoring and verification mechanism is operationalized as soon as possible. China appreciates the contribution of the African Union and sub-regional organizations to peace in eastern DRC. Any external process should maintain alignment and coordination with the AO process and respect the AO's leading role in the peace process of eastern DRC. Third, the peacekeeping mission's ability to fulfill its mandate must be secured. Currently, MONUSCO is grappling with ongoing restrictions of movement, interruption of its water, electricity, and fuel supplies, as well as downsizing and budget cuts. The mission is only capable of sustaining basic operations. The Security Council should urge the relevant parties to lift movement restrictions on MONUSCO and, at the same time, conduct a comprehensive assessment of the challenges that affect the mission's mandate delivery with a view to finding solutions. MONUSCO can play a role in supporting the peace process in eastern DRC, including ceasefire monitoring. However, any adjustments to MONUSCO's mandate must be based on the situation on the ground, with a feasible plan and predictable outcomes, and must be fully assessed by the Secretariat. Rushing decisions prematurely, or even treating the MONUSCO mandate as a carte blanche, will only further disrupt MONUSCO's mandated activities and undermine the credibility of both the mission and the Security Council. MONUSCO is a UN-led peacekeeping mission, and its actions should be guided by the UN Charter and reflect the common will of member states. China reiterates its firm support for MONUSCO in fulfilling its duties. President, the situation in eastern DRC is now at a critical juncture. The international community should set aside geopolitical calculations, build consensus for peace, join forces with all parties, and genuinely commit to regional peace, development, and prosperity. As a good friend of countries in the region, China remains committed to working with all parties to make unremitting efforts for the settlement of the conflict as well as development and stability in eastern DRC. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to start by thanking our briefers, to welcome Her Excellency the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as the representatives of Rwanda and Burundi to this meeting, and to thank the chair of 1533 Committee for his update. Mr. President, almost a year since the dramatic escalation of the conflict in eastern DRC, we meet at a moment of both fragile progress and persistent acute risks. Important steps have been taken, yet many decisive actions still lie ahead. I would like to stress the following points. First, we repeat that Resolution 2773 must be implemented immediately, fully, and unconditionally. We remain particularly alarmed by the deteriorating security situation in South Kivu, driven by the continuing advance of the AFC M23 with the alleged support of the Rwandan Defense Forces and the risk of a spillover of the conflict that could trigger a regional crisis. AFC M23 must immediately cease hostilities and withdraw from Goma, Bukavu, and all other controlled areas. As the Council stressed in its recent press statement, all illegitimate parallel administrations must be dismantled, restoring state authority throughout the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In this context, we reiterate Greece's steadfast support for the independence, sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of the DRC. Second, we welcome all efforts towards a ceasefire and a sustainable peace, stability, and reconciliation in Eastern DRC, and commend the United States and Qatar for their critical mediation efforts. We congratulate President Tshisekedi and President Kagame for the signing of the Washington Peace Accords for Peace and Prosperity on December 4th, as well as the issuing of the joint declaration on the accords by the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda. We urge them to now accelerate the implementation of their commitments as provided by the accords. These gains must not be undermined by a new escalation in South Kivu by the M23. We also welcome the signing of the Doha Framework for Peace between the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the AFC M23 on November 15th, and we urge them to materialize their commitment to a permanent ceasefire. Third, we are deeply concerned about the grave humanitarian and security consequences of the conflict both in North and South Kivu and in Ituri, as we have heard by our briefers today. All parties must respect international humanitarian law and ensure unrestricted humanitarian access and facilitate humanitarian flights as well. We are particularly concerned about the grave human rights violations and abuses committed against women and children, notably large-scale recruitment and use of children, abductions, killings and maimings, and shocking levels of sexual violence. All perpetrators of violations of international humanitarian law and of violations and abuses of human rights must be held accountable and be brought to justice. Finally, MONUSCO's freedom of movement must be unobstructed and its ability to operate must remain unrestricted. Resolution 2773 reiterates the Council's full support for MONUSCO, whose works remains critical in the DRC in protecting civilians, responding to urgent humanitarian needs, and supporting the implementation of the peace process. We emphasize once more our strong commitment to the safety and security of MONUSCO's personnel. Madam President, as the Council considers the upcoming renewal MONUSCO's mandate, Greece stands ready to work closely with all members to ensure that the mission can continue fulfilling its critical role at this pivotal juncture for the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG Lakwa, Ambassador Kanu, and Dr. Abdel Monem for their briefings, and also welcome Her Excellency Ms. Teresa Kaira Amba Wagner, DRC's Foreign Minister, and the representative of Rwanda and Burundi to this meeting. To begin, we strongly condemn the M23's recent advance in Uvira in South Kivu, a serious development which risks further escalating the conflict across the region.
The unanimously adopted Resolution 2773 demands that M23 immediately cease all hostilities, withdraw from all controlled areas, and the Rwanda Defense Force and its support of M23. We urge all parties to fully and immediately implement this urgent call from Security Council. I'd like to highlight following 3 points. First, the conflict cannot be resolved by the force under any circumstances. In this regard, we welcome the ongoing efforts toward a political solution, including the Washington Accords for Peace and Prosperity, signed on 4 December between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, and welcome the United States mediation efforts. We urge all parties to faithfully implement their commitments. We also recognize the efforts of Qatar and African Union to advance both Washington and Doha processes. Regional cooperation is indispensable for the sustainability of the agreement. We encourage this political process to be closely aligned with regional mechanisms, including ICGLR. Second, while our expectations should remain high, they must take into account the reality on the ground. In this regard, we are deeply concerned by the recent offensive expansion of M23 and discouraged by the local community's continuing voice. Nothing has changed. Armed groups such as ADF and Codeco, which are not parties to the ongoing peace processes, continue to carry out attacks against civilians and civilian facilities, including hospital and church. Such attacks must stop immediately. We also call on the DRC government and MONUSCO to redouble their efforts, not only to disarm, dismobilize, but also to reintegrate their armed groups. The situation on humanitarian front is also alarming. 5.7 million people remains internally displaced, and food insecurity and medical conditions continue to worsen. Humanitarian assistance to those in need must be swiftly delivered. We condemn any actions that obstruct this effort. Third, MONUSCO's active role is more necessary than ever, particularly at a time when security conditions on the ground continue to contradict the parties' previous pledges. We expect MONUSCO to play a meaningful role in ensuring that the ongoing peace process are effectively implemented. To carry out its mandate fully and effectively, the mission must guarantee full freedom of movement and uninterrupted access to its operational infrastructure. I urge M23 to immediately lift all restrictions imposed on MONUSCO, including access to electricity, fuel, water, as well as troop rotations. We recall that under the Washington Accord, both DRC and Rwanda agreed to support and facilitate MONUSCO's capability to implement its mandate. We therefore urge all parties to translate their commitment into concrete action. Mr. President, the Republic of Korea remains firmly committed to a stable and peaceful DRC and support MONUSCO's vital role in this endeavor. In this vein, we will continue to remain engaged with developments in DRC and discussions on MONUSCO's forthcoming mandate renewal. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank USG Lacroix and Médecins Sans Frontières for their briefings. And I would like to welcome the participation of Her Excellency Foreign Minister Wagner, as well as representatives of Rwanda and Burundi in this meeting. 2025 has been a year of major developments in the DRC. Despite consistent challenges on the ground, MONUSCO has continued to deliver. Denmark commends MONUSCO for its tireless efforts in support of peace in extremely difficult circumstances. Mr. President, allow me to raise 3 points. First, We commend the collective mediation efforts by the United States and Qatar, as well as the key role played by the President of Togo as the African Union appointed lead mediator and a panel of facilitators. We welcome the signing by the Presidents of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda of the Washington Accords on 4 December and the signing by DRC and the M23 of the Doha Framework for a Comprehensive Peace Agreement on 15 November. However, we are deeply concerned that the commitments made by these parties are not being upheld. Just this week, continued advances of the M23 AFC and the intensified clashes in South Kivu resulted in mass casualties and destructions of civilian infrastructure. We call on all parties to refrain from further escalation and remind all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law. We further urge M23 and the Rwanda Defense Forces to immediately halt offensive operations. In line with Resolution 2773, Denmark reiterates its call on Rwanda to withdraw its troops from eastern DRC and end its support to the M23, as well as we call on the DRC to cease its support for the FDLR. The latest developments strongly underline the need for an immediate cessation of hostilities, leading to a permanent and verifiable ceasefire. Second, Denmark remains concerned by the appalling human rights situation in eastern DRC. We condemn widespread reports of conflict-related sexual violence incidents, notably the use of rape and other forms of sexual violence, including against children. We strongly support the recommendations by the fact-finding mission on the DRC to integrate accountability and transitional justice into peace negotiations and strengthen efforts to prevent and punish conflict-related sexual violence. As we've heard from our civil society briefer today, these violations and abuses are taking place in the context of a catastrophic humanitarian situation. We reiterate our calls for unhindered and safe humanitarian access, including through Goma Airport. We welcome the pledges made on the Great Lake Conference in Paris in October and urge their rapid implementation. My final point, Mr. President. As we approach the renewal of MONUSCO's mandate, Denmark underlines our support for the mission, as well as the critical need for its presence for stability and the protection of civilians in eastern DRC. MONUSCO's mandate must reflect the current operational reality and respond to the situation on the ground, both with regard to possibilities for support to the peace processes and emerging protection needs. We thank the peacekeepers who put their life at risk in the DRC. We underscore that all parties must cease obstructions of the mission's operations and ensure its freedom of movement, resupply, and troop rotations. Let me conclude by expressing our deep appreciation of Special Representative Bintou Keita for her dedication and leadership during her time as head of MONUSCO. We look forward to the timely appointment of her successor at this critical time for the mission. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We join colleagues in welcoming the presence of the Honorable Foreign Minister of the DRC to this meeting, as well as the representatives of Burundi and Rwanda. Pakistan thanks the briefers for the clear articulation of the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, deeply complex and challenging as it is, yet with an opportunity now to improve things on ground. We appreciate the outgoing SRSG, Bintou Keita, for a job well done under extremely challenging circumstances. President, we commend all MONUSCO personnel for their professionalism and courage under extraordinarily difficult conditions. We pay a solemn tribute to the peacekeepers who lost their lives, including those killed in the aftermath of the M23 takeover of Goma. Their services embody the highest ideals of the United Nations. The perpetrators of those attacks and their supporters must be held accountable. The situation in the Eastern DRC remains extremely volatile. The security environment has deteriorated sharply. Despite the commitments made in the Doha framework for a comprehensive peace agreement on a ceasefire, M23 continues its territorial expansion, including the recent takeover of Uvira. And despite the signing of the Washington Agreement, the AFC M23 continue to receive external support. It is essential that commitments made under these agreements are implemented. We call for an immediate ceasefire and complete cessation of hostilities. It is regrettable that Resolution 2773 remains unimplemented. Nearly 40% of MONUSCO's area of oppression is under the control of the AFC M23. MONUSCO's movements in these territories are severely restricted. Its supply chains disrupted and troop rotations remain difficult. These conditions prevent the mission from implementing its mandate, particularly the protection of civilians. It is unacceptable that armed groups have imposed parallel administrations and stopped utilities of the UN personnel. We condemn these actions unequivocally. M23 must allow MONUSCO to perform its mandate assigned by this Council. It is equally important to address this situation in the context of the current mandate renewal of the mission. The mission must be given mandates that are realistic, achievable, and aligned with realities on ground. MONUSCO, as the only credible and impartial force, is uniquely positioned to play a central role in promoting peace and stability in the DRC. The Council should leverage MONUSCO's institutional experience, logistical reach, and operational presence. It is thus best placed to performing critical tasks, including monitoring and verifying a ceasefire once it is in place. The discussions on MONUSCO's potential ceasefire monitoring role in South Kivu are also important. Pakistan, as one of the largest troop contributing countries to South Kivu, had earlier cautioned that the withdrawal from South Kivu was premature and might create a security vacuum. Regrettably, that assessment has proven correct. This also underscores the need to meaningfully consult those who serve on the ground. Decision-making on mandates and adjustments must better integrate the views of troop and police contributing countries and field leadership. It is also imperative the mandates be matched with commensurate resources. MONUSCO's budget was reduced by $45.3 million, leading to the repatriation of over 700 troops. A subsequent 25% contingency planning further decreased the mission strength by 1,550 personnel. While the authorized troop ceiling remains at 11,500, MONUSCO currently has only around 8,234 troops on ground. This stark mismatch between the mission's responsibilities and shrinking resources must be urgently addressed to ensure that MONUSCO can effectively deliver on the tasks entrusted to it by the Security Council. President, Pakistan welcomes the recent diplomatic momentum aimed at achieving peace in the Eastern DRC. We appreciate Qatar for facilitating the Doha framework between the DRC government and M23. We also welcome the United States leadership in facilitating the Washington Agreement, signed on 4th December, as a historic step towards regional de-escalation and improved relations between the DRC and Rwanda. Pakistan further commends the African Union-led process under the mediation of Togo, which seeks to harmonize the Rwanda and Nairobi tracks into a coherent African-led framework. We agree with Undersecretary General Lacroix that the gap between the political and diplomatic efforts and the real impact on ground risks undermining these efforts. These processes must strive to address the root causes of the conflict in the DRC for lasting peace and stability. We reaffirm our support for the UN Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region, whose role remains crucial in ensuring coordination and complementarity among these parallel efforts. It is essential that all peace initiatives remain mutually reinforcing and regionally supported and backed by the Security Council and grounded in safeguarding the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. Finally, we urge the parties to demonstrate political will, to engage in serious dialogue and fulfill their obligations, and avail this opportunity that is presented currently by the high level of international engagement and support to realize sustainable peace in the region. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as representative of Slovenia. I thank Undersecretary General Lacroix and Ambassador Kanu for their updates. We are grateful to Dr. Abdel Monem for his uncompromising frontline testimony. What we heard today must be yet another wake-up call. The human cost of this conflict is laid bare before us, stark, undeniable, and worsening by day. We welcome also the presence of the Minister Wagner from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as the representatives of Burundi and Rwanda. Slovenia remains alarmed by the continued sharp escalation of hostilities in eastern DRC, some unfolding even as this Council meets. These developments run directly counter to this Council's decision, in particular Resolution 2773. We welcome intensified diplomatic efforts by the US, Qatar, and African Union, including the signing of the Washington Accords and the Doha Framework for Peace. These diplomatic tracks hold promise, but must be translated into verifiable steps by all parties. As Slovenia has consistently stressed, no progress is possible without silencing the guns. And we agree with Undersecretary General Lacroix, as well as with several colleagues, that declarations are not enough. Compliance must be demonstrated. Diplomacy must not be used as a shield behind which military gains continue. We call on all parties, Rwanda, the DRC, and the AFC M23, to fully and immediately uphold their commitments. The realities on the ground tell a different story. The latest advances of M23 in South Kivu marks a dangerous widening of the conflict. Slovenia condemns these offensives. We call for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in line with 2773, and we call on M23 and Rwanda Defense Forces to halt all offensive operations and withdraw. Civilians must not bear the burden of promises that are not honored. We condemn every attack on civilians, medical facilities, humanitarian personnel, and critical infrastructure, not only by M23, but also violence of ADF, Codeco, Zaire, CRP, FDLR, and other armed groups. MSF has just briefed on attacks on health centers, mass displacement, and the immense difficulty conducting life-saving operations. Dr. Abdel Monem, we follow MFS's life-saving work closely, including the unbearable realities of your teams confront daily. The reporting of sexual violence and the sentence that they are not feared but expected, as you just said, is truly shocking, is devastating. Slovenia condemns this brutality in the strongest possible terms. We call on all parties to implement concrete, verifiable measures to reduce harm to civilians, including ceasing all attacks and guaranteeing safe movements for humanitarian actors, including reopening of Goma and Kavumu airports. Slovenia expresses its full support for MONUSCO, and we thank Ms. Bintu Keita for all her efforts and leadership as SRSG and her field-focused diplomacy. As we approach MONUSCO's mandate renewal, the Council must carefully reflect on the current context and trajectories ahead. MONUSCO must remain appropriately equipped and positioned to navigate rapidly changing conditions, particularly in protection of civilians, support to peace processes, disarmament and demobilization, and human rights monitoring. Colleagues, the people of the DRC need and deserve more than perpetual crisis management. We are of the view that with restraint, responsibility, respect for international law, regional cooperation grounded in respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states, non-support to armed groups, and accountability, a path toward de-escalation, lasting peace remains possible. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kaikwamba Wagner, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation, Francophonie, and Congolese Diaspora of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, members of the Council, I am grateful for giving me the floor to examine the report of the Secretary General, as well as to consider the renewal of the mandate of MONUSCO. I hail the quality of the report, and I pay tribute to the DPPO, to humanitarian actors, and all UN personnel who day after day work to protect civilians in conditions of extreme seriousness. We'd like to recall that the very rationale of this organization is to defend human dignity, even when in adverse circumstances. I also hail here the presence here and the important contribution of Undersecretary General Mr. Jean Lacroix of Sierra Leone in its capacity as chair of the 1533 committee, and the president of Médecins Sans Frontières and the representative of Burundi. Mr. President, on the 4th of December of this year in Washington, Presidents Felix Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame signed an agreement facilitated by the United States under the leadership of President Donald Trump. This agreement, supported by regional guarantors and international ones, brought and continues to bring the hope of a historic turning point. And yet, less than 24 hours after that signature, the facts have refuted the commitments undertaken. There were bombings, explosive drones, coordinated offensives around Uvira and in the Ruzizi Plain. It's unacceptable that a solemn agreement should thus be trampled on the very day after it was signed on to. These actions put into question the dynamic created in Washington and confirm what the Secretary General's report underscores. The ceasefire demanded by Resolution 2773 has not been implemented. Attacks against civilians persist. Humanitarian access is hindered, and the situation continues to worsen in spite of diplomatic efforts. Your Excellencies, the Democratic Republic of the Congo voluntarily chose the path of diplomacy. This choice is neither a concession or a sign of weakness. It reflects our control of this, our sense of responsibility, and our faith in multilateral mechanisms, which are, if fully embraced, could still restore peace. We have made this choice because we believe in the commitment of the United States, the main facilitator of the Washington process. We believe in the steadfastness of the state of Qatar, guarantor of the Doha process, and in the norm and in the value of the Rwanda process as a framework. Its principles continue to guide the actions of the African Union, currently led by the Togolese Republic. The DRC has acted in good faith. It continues to act in good faith. Diplomacy for us is not some default setting. It is the very expression of our sense of responsibility as a state and our respect of international law. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, since the 4th of December in the evening, positions around Gatoguta, Ruvungi, Kaziba, Burambo, Luvungi, and along the Kamanyola-Uvira axis have been targeted by shelling coming from the positions of the RDF M23. Kamikaze drones have hit civilian areas. Over 500,000 people have once again been displaced. South Kivu, already in a precarious situation, has reached a breaking point. These facts have been documented by humanitarian mechanisms and confirmed by OCHA. They also create a major risk of regionalization. Shells have already hit Burundi. Uvira is only 30 kilometers from Bujumbura. No neighboring country can be exposed to such attacks without risking escalation. Regional stability cannot rest on the normalization of violations that are as serious as this. Mr. President, less than a week after the signature of the Washington agreements, certain actors have chosen to stray from the commitments freely undertaken. Reversing the narrative and using systematic disinformation to attribute to the Democratic Republic of the Congo the responsibility for attacks committed by the coalition RDF M23 is a well-documented strategy now by international mechanisms. We cannot accept for manipulation to become an instrument of regional policy. Facts are stubborn things. The resolution of the Security Council are even more stubborn. The truth is not negotiable. International law cannot be perverted to legitimize aggression. Observed violations contravene Resolution 2773, contravene the agreement of the 27th of June, the agreement signed in Washington on the 4th of December to the Doha Agreement, and the very conditions of the implementation of the Regional Economic Integration Framework that was also signed in Washington. Today, it is the very credibility of the entire process and of their guarantors that is at stake.
These members of the Council, we have reached a moment of truth. Either the international order accepts being openly defied, namely by Rwanda, or this Council assumes its responsibility. Impunity has gone on for far too long. The Congolese people cannot continue to bear the cost of commitments that are violated and resolutions that are not implemented. The facts are clear. The ceasefire demanded by Resolution 2773 has not been respected. Foreign forces, namely the RDF, remain on Congolese soil. Civilians continue to be targeted. Humanitarian access is obstructed, and disinformation is being used deliberately to invert responsibilities and shield the perpetrators. The credibility of all processes, Washington, Doha, and the African facilitation depends on one principle: accountability. Without consequences, agreements have no force. Without consequences, the cycle of violence will continue. Resolution 2773 is not lacking in clarity. What is lacking is its enforcement. A resolution that is not enforced does not deter violence, it invites it. When violations carry no comes policy. The responsibility now before this Council is not to restate its decisions, but to enforce them.
Mr. President, 9 months after the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2773, the conclusion is inexorable. Yet another city has fallen. A parallel administration has been consolidated. Thousands of additional families have taken flight. Others have been killed, raped, terrorized. And even MONUSCO, blue helmets, civilian personnel, leadership, have been targeted. Over the course of these 9 months, this Council has taken no concrete measure to uphold its own resolution and to defend its own mission. Appeals, warnings, but no action. This lack of action has allowed Rwanda to continue and expand its operations in an environment where violations bring about no consequences. The time has come for this Council to confront an essential question. To what extent, in 3 decades of crisis, the absence of coercive measures has contributed to the persistence of these violations? Mr. President, Resolution 2773 remains the lodestar of the UN's involvement. It must be implemented in its entirety without any ambiguity or exceptions. The Democratic Republic of the Congo calls for a robust, coherent mandate adapted to the realities on the ground, one that protects the very authority of this Council A renewed mandate must guarantee the protection of civilians, reaffirm the withdrawal of foreign forces, support humanitarian operations, explicitly include the protection of blue helmets of civilian personnel and leadership of MONUSCO, condemn any attacks against them, and prevent any circumvention of the decisions by the Council, because indeed, obstruction of the UN mandate by Rwanda M23 can never justify its weakening. This Council cannot cede in the face of this challenge to its authority. Mr. President, the DRC is an African country, but the DRC is also a fully fledged member of the international community. We respect African solutions to African problems. However, this cannot become a kind of legal relativism, making it possible to circumvent universal norms. There is no regional version of human rights or of sovereignty. Any lasting solution must be based on universal principles of the United Nations Charter. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Council, the Congolese people have chosen peace. The people has demanded, negotiated, and signed onto it. It must not pay the price of the bad faith of those who shrug off their commitments. Peace cannot rest on promises not kept. The Congolese people are entitled to security, to justice, and respect for international law. This Council must act so that these rights do not remain theoretical, but at last become a reality. This is why the Democratic Republic of the Congo calls this Council to fully implement Resolution 2773, to impose targeted sanctions against the military and political leaders responsible for the aggression, impose a complete embargo on minerals that are exported and is labeled as Rwandan, revoke the status of troop-contributing country from Rwanda, and establish a systematic notification regime for any transfer of weapons towards Rwanda. The Washington and Doha guarantors, the African facilitators, must also assume their responsibilities. These agreements will only survive on condition of collective steadfastness. It is now up to the international community to uphold the commitments undertaken and pave the way at last for the advent of a lasting peace in the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the entire Great Lakes region. Thank you very much.
I thank Her Excellency, Ms. Kaikwamba Wagner, for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Rwanda.
Mr. President, I thank you for giving me the floor, and allow me to begin by commending you for your effective leadership of the Council this month. I also extend Rwanda's appreciation to the Council members concluding their terms. Your service and contributions to the Council's work have been invaluable. I thank USG Rakurwa, Dr. Mohamed Javid, for their briefing and taking note of the Secretary General's report. I also acknowledge the statements made by those who spoke before me. As the Council considers MONUSCO's next mandate, Rwanda expects a mission that is clearly anchored in and reinforcing of the Washington Peace Agreement and the Doha Framework, both of which the Secretary General's report rightly identifies as the central avenues for a sustainable peace. The mandate must therefore prioritize strict impartiality and political neutrality, support to ceasefire implementation and political dialogue, robust human rights due diligence policy compliance, timely suspension and reporting mechanisms where required, refraining from offensive operations against parties formally engaged in political processes, and a realistic resource-conscious focus on stability, accountability, and political solutions. These priorities reflect the realities outlined in the Secretary General's report. MONUSCO's effectiveness will depend on aligning its operations with the political tracks that offer the only viable path forward. The Washington Peace Agreement and the Doha process are complementary, mutually reinforcing frameworks. When the mission supports them consistently and impartially, it can help to create the necessary space for implementation. Rwanda reiterates its full commitment to implement its part of the agreement. We equally believe that the success of the agreement will depend on the political will of both parties. Mr. President, the recent situation in South Kivu has been extensively discussed, and allow me a moment to also address it. And I will address some of the issues that may logically attract the question, why am I addressing them? But there is a background to that. In 1994, in this chamber, Ambassador Kovac of Czech Republic, Ambassador Keateng of New Zealand, Ambassador Gambari of Nigeria spoke that Rwandans were being exterminated, that an ethnic group in Rwanda was being exterminated. They had never been to Rwanda, but they discharged their responsibility, confronted denial and silence that was taking place in this chamber to call the genocide for what it was, as it was happening in Rwanda. So, I'm here today, and I survive today because those courageous diplomats discharged their duty. I wanted to do it. The situation in South Kivu and the general situation obtaining after the Washington Agreement is a collection of many situations. The ceasefire that was repeatedly broken by the DRC government, that not only broke the ceasefire, but announced they would never stop attacks. Air attacks are offensives too. Even as the diplomatic tracks move forward, the situation on the ground in South Kivu continues to deteriorate in ways this council cannot morally or legally ignore. Over the past year, and in reality since 2017, the Banyamulenge, a Tutsi Kinyarwanda-speaking community of the DRC, have endured a well-documented, systematic, and escalating persecution. I just want to address this area alone, among many things that put it together cause the situation we are in. Allow me to highlight just a few incidents which are part of this sustained and systematic campaign of persecution of the Banyamulenge Kinyarwanda-speaking Tutsi ethnic group. Since 2017, more than 85% of Banyamulenge villages in South Kivu were destroyed. An estimated 700,000 cattle, which is their economic lifeline, were raided and killed. On August 25th of 2025, Wazalendo militias and FARDC issued a 10-day ultimatum demanding that all Banyamulenge leave Uvira or be killed. The ultimatum further prohibited them from accessing markets, water points, and other essential means of survival. On the 4th of September 2025, the decision was made to deny the Banyamulenge civilians access to public water points on the grounds that they were enemies. From the 5th to 8th of September 2025, Banyamulenge civilians were abducted and shot, while the mobs chanted for the end of the Banyamulenge. These are early warnings, indicators of atrocity crimes, discrimination, dehumanization, forced displacement, and the denial of basic services. Tens of thousands of Burundian soldiers were deployed into South Kivu on the invitation of the government of the DRC. This is in addition to the presence of FDLR, mercenaries, Wazalendo, and other militias. These troops established coordinated military blockades, which exacerbated the situation above. Their operations alongside FARDC, FDLR, and the affiliated militias imposed a siege on the Banyamulenge population. And I wanted to highlight here that there are other ethnic groups in that area. There are Babembe, Bafurero, There is another ethnic group that I don't remember. But these conditions I'm describing were imposed only on Banyamulenge Tutsi ethnic group. Banyamulenge, yes. Their operations alongside FARDC and FDLR and affiliated militias imposed a siege on the Banyamulenge population, resulting in nearly a year of the communities in Minembwe Highlands being deprived of food, medicine, and humanitarian access. This situation was exacerbated by the coordinated military blockades. On the 16th to 18th of October 2025, the only road to the Mitamba market was closed, cutting off food supplies to civilians. On the 6th of September 2025, a group of 80 to 100, between 80 and 100 Banyamulenge civilians, mostly women, returning with food for their starving families, were ambushed by a FARDC Burundian Mai Mai coalition, and reports indicate killings, torture, and sexual violence. Equally well known, but disregarded, is the scale of air attacks carried out by DRC government forces and their allies, which continue to affect civilians already under siege. Among many others are the following. On the 29th of August 2025, and multiple dates, repeated drone strikes hit the outskirts of Banyamulenge IDP camps around Mikenya. On the 27th of September 2025, a Burundian CH-4 drone bombed Nzibira in South Kivu. On the 15th of November 2025, Kinshasa operated drones bombed Mikenya, a village hosting Banyamulenge internally displaced persons. Between March and December this year, there has been 50 air attacks in this area. No one is speaking about this. I will appreciate the situation another day if we can be told this didn't happen. We have raised this, at least I did, with some members of the council, individually. We have raised this in this chamber. Nothing was done. The government of the DRC, as an inviting authority, should be responsible for the action and the conduct on the ground of Burundian forces and their allies. Rwanda has not been silent. I just said this. Rwanda has not been silent in the face of these developments. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs has raised the blockade directly with the mediators, the United States and Qatar, the representatives of the European Union and the African Union. And I have just said that I raised it with individual members of the Council. I raised it with the penny holder, with some presidencies, with the heads of some mechanisms in the region, and nothing happened. Taking into account the factual situation and the wider context of hate ideology in DRC and the inherent legal and moral obligation, allow me to ask the question. Has the Security Council not been aware of this situation? Or did it not? Did this situation not merit your attention? The situation in South Kivu, as we address it, we must consider what was the situation before the recent escalation. As a former investigator myself, there is what we call recreating the scene. From where we sit, we can only tell you the facts. But the Security Council can, among the wide possibilities you have, to recreate this scene. Choose to recreate it. But that is how it will look. All the principles that we have spoken about, sovereignty, territorial integrity, Rwanda is part of that multilateral belief that must be respected. But the existence of FDLR threatens all of that. Yes, facts are stubborn. Resolutions are more stubborn. And in the resolutions, one stubborn fact is that DRC government has, for the past 30 years, supported the FDLR. FDLR does not just threaten the territorial integrity of Rwanda. It threatens the very existence of Rwanda and its people. One of my uncles paid money in 94, so he could be killed by the bullet. Because there was that situation, you either choose to be shot or you die by a machete. One of my uncles paid money to be killed by a bullet. So everyone can make a decision not to care about the situation of Rwanda and the threat we face. All these people that I'm talking on behalf of, because nobody else does, in the situation they face. But do we also ask them to be participants in their own situation, to be part of the plan for their own extermination? Can we go that far? So to conclude, honorable members of, distinguished members of the council, we thank the mediators. We thank them very much. And we thank most profoundly the efforts that are going on by the mediators, particularly the United States, to address the most recent situation. And we are a willing participant to finding a viable solution forward, because we believe if we all commit to implementing in good faith the commitments we made in Washington, and if we support fully the process in Doha, then we possibly have a possibility to have a peaceful solution to the conflict that we have lived with for many, many years. This problem has gone on for too long, and it is our request and our appeal that we should all focus to supporting the present avenues for a peaceful solution. I will not go into what we said in the past. We have been here many times. Why do we have defensive measures and how are they going to be lifted? All those issues are addressed in the agreements, and we shall continue to work with mediators and to make sure that we meet our part of the challenge. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Rwanda for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Burundi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by congratulating Slovenia on its presidency of the month and for having placed this briefing on MONUSCO on the agenda of the Security Council. Burundi would like to thank the Secretary General for the presentation of his report and commends MONUSCO's ongoing efforts working under extremely complex conditions. We also appreciate the opportunity given to us to share our assessment of the security situation, and we wish to draw the Council's attention to the dramatic developments in the security and humanitarian situation, particularly in the city of Uvira and its surrounding areas, and the massive displacement of populations with thousands of refugees currently in Burundi, notably in Bujumbura province in the commune of Cibitoke. Burundi wishes to denounce the repeated and ongoing violation of Resolution 2773 as evidenced by the seizure of Uvira by the Rwandan army. These operations have targeted and resulted in countless civilian casualties. We are particularly concerned by the cross-border attacks, including the use of artillery, drones, and other lethal means, some of which have struck localities within Burundian territory. These acts violate Burundi's sovereignty. They endanger the security of civilian populations and undermine collective efforts for peace. We believe that the current moment calls for clarity, political courage, and a collective commitment to the full and effective complete implementation of the Security Council's resolutions, particularly Resolution 2773. The commitments recently undertaken including those endorsed in the agreements signed in Washington, must be respected by all parties, without ambiguity and without preconditions. We therefore call upon the Council to, firstly, ensure that Security Council resolutions are implemented impartially, because the collective credibility of this Council depends on its ability to guarantee their effective enforcement. The relevance and credibility of MONUSCO are at stake. Secondly, protect civilians, especially women and children, who remain the primary victims of a conflict that has been imposed upon them. Thirdly, we call upon the Council to advocate for urgent humanitarian assistance in the light of the deterioration of the humanitarian situation and the acute lack of resources available to United Nations systems and system agencies to meet the basic needs of refugees settled in Gatumba and Cibitoke. We also call upon the Council to convene an urgent meeting of the Council at which robust measures could be adopted in order to halt this dangerous escalation, potentially including an arms embargo and a regime of economic sanctions, in order to prevent the continuation of these deadly military operations conducted in violation of international law and, in particular, the Charter of the United Nations. We also call upon the Council to support the Democratic Republic of the Congo and neighboring states in coordinated efforts to combat armed groups in strict respect for internationally recognized borders. And finally, we call upon the Council to strengthen its support for regional verification and monitoring mechanisms in order to document violations, prevent escalation, and rebuild trust. Furthermore, Burundi wishes to inform this August Council that it has taken very seriously the message conveyed by the bombs launched from Rwanda on the 4th of December onto Burundian soil in the commune of Cibitoke, injuring a woman and a child. We consider this act to be a grave provocation and a manifestation of a belligerent attitude which we strongly condemn. Let me be clear. Restraint has its limits. Should these irresponsible attacks continue, it would become extremely difficult to avoid a direct escalation between our two countries. Burundi cannot tolerate repeated violations of its territorial integrity and reserves the right to exercise self-defense in accordance with the provisions of Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. Burundi remains a reliable partner for regional peace and security. While it has upheld the protection of civilian populations with dignity in all missions in which it has been deployed, Burundi cannot remain idle in the face of provocations and violations of its territorial integrity. We can't remain idle in the face of attacks against its population, and we cannot remain idle in the face of threats to the stability of our borders. Our message today is therefore a call for restraint, for firmness against proven violations, and for concerted action that will finally allow Eastern DRC, and in particular areas such as Uvira, to envision, finally, a future of lasting peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Burundi for the statement. The representative of Rwanda has asked for the floor to make a further statement. Before giving him the floor, I just want to say that I don't want to prolong the exchanges, which will not help implement the agreements or the resolution 2773, and neither protect the civilians who are suffering. The council members have heard your messages very clear, and that's why I would ask you to take the floor only once. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I don't have any intention of unnecessarily prolonging the discussion. Just wanted to clarify that Rwanda is not waging war against the Republic of Burundi and has no intention of doing that. To the contrary, there has been an attack from the territory of Burundi to the area of Bugarama in Rwanda, and in some parts of the DRC, resulting into refugees coming to Rwanda. I believe the UNHCR is already involved in that process. So I wanted to make that clarification.
I thank the representative of Rwanda for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.